Hello, listeners. It's Gunter here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number 1 in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host. I'm a psychologist and an author, and I started the Making Good Men Great movement. Now, it's just not a movement. It's a whole process and program about becoming the man that you want to be. Now, obviously, I know that this podcast is listened to by men and women, and I think it's a good medium for both men and women to listen to and then have conversations, meaningful conversations about what I talk about. So, what am I going to talk about today? Well, after a bit of contemplation, I decided that really what I wanted to do is carry on with the idea of masculinity redefined. And in this instance, I want to talk about strength in empathy and connection. Because there are some people in the world who tend to think that empathy is not necessary and that connection is a bit of bullshit. But frankly, they're core stones, core pillars in what it means to be human. So I'm going to take you through an exploration of a fresh vision for masculinity, and that has been the case for the whole of the 7 seasons. All right? And it's basically, this vision is basically about being inclusive, emotionally intelligent, and deeply connected to others. I'm going to challenge some of those traditional myths that don't serve us anymore. I'm going to talk about how patriarchal conditioning has shaped what we think about manhood. And I'm going to talk about how to replace those myths and that patriarchal conditioning with something that has a greater depth, purpose, and meaning. In other words, how to see male strength from a very different perspective. I'm also going to tie this all back to the core principles of making good men great, the framework, which is really about helping men move from just getting by to truly feeling fulfilled. So let me get into it. And I'm going to start this podcast with a quote from from Hannah Arendt in the book The Origins of Totalitarianism. Now, I think this is a very specifically important topic to the upside-down world that we're currently inhabiting. As you know, one of the serious problems that exist at the moment for men, also women, but let me focus on men, is the issue about isolation and loneliness. And Hannah Arendt makes a very, very astute observation. She says, what prepares men for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience, usually suffered in certain marginal conditions like old age, has become an everyday experience of the ever-growing masses of our century. Now, what a brilliant observation. And she wrote this in 1951. And to me, it looks like she had a looking glass into the future. This insight is fundamental. It's central to her analysis that loneliness is not just isolation. It's a psychological condition that makes individuals susceptible to totalitarian ideologies. Think incels, for example. Think any form of fundamentalism. It's not merely the absence of others, but the disintegration of shared reality and meaningful relationships, which leaves individuals vulnerable to absolute systems of thought and rule. Now, Arendt saw this as a fundamental precondition to the rise of totalitarian regimes. And we have continued the tradition from the 20th century into the 21st century, which in my view is a fundamental disgrace. And this is why I talk about the need to deconstruct traditional masculinity, patriarchy, because essentially in many respects patriarchy is a totalitarian system. Now, for generations, masculinity has been defined by a very rigid set of expectations. Dominance, stoicism, control, and unyielding competition and combat. These qualities, often glorified in media, religion, and family culture, are the core of what I call the 5 pillars of patriarchy. Now, I define them also in this way. Patriarchy rests on these 5 pillars: territoriality, hierarchy or status, acquisition, competition, and combativeness. Now, let me be clear. Sometimes these traits aren't inherently bad. However, they become dangerous when they become the sole yardstick by which we measure a man's worth, or any person's worth. When we teach boys that emotional expression is a weakness, where we suppress their emotional intelligence, when we praise only aggression and independence, where we isolate them from meaningful connections, wherein others become objects. In doing so, we build a society filled with emotionally constricted men who are disconnected from themselves and others. Men who are taught that vulnerability is shameful and who more often than we care to think, suffer in silence. This toxic legacy not only harms men, as I've said before, it impacts everyone in their relational orbit: partners, children, friends, colleagues, communities. And so this is where the Making Good Men Great framework comes in. In this framework, I aim to help men construct a healthy, authentic, and evolving sense of self, where we promote emotional intelligence mindfulness, and relational awareness, where we deconstruct and transform the internalized effects of patriarchy, our inner obstructiveness to growth. It's also where we empower men to lead with empathy, accountability, and purpose, and where we foster community, mentorship, and collective growth across generations. This isn't about discarding masculinity. Don't be taken in by those ultra-right-wing forces like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and many, many more. It's a hotbed of deceit out there when it comes to describing what maleness, masculinity is about and should be about. It's about also reimagining it for the 21st century, and to do so in a way that honours the full spectrum of human experience. So let me address one of the most dangerous myths we tell boys and men, that they must go it alone. This is the lone wolf archetype, and it's deeply ingrained in our cultural imagination. Think about all those movies and TV series where that's represented. Right? We see it in action hero survival narratives, and most importantly, in many respects, in the corporate leadership myth. But let's consider the reality. Wolves are not solitary by nature. They're a pack animal. They thrive in cooperation, in shared protection, and in community bonding. The lone wolf, separated from its pack, does not survive for long. And the metaphor quickly falls apart under scrutiny. Yet many, many, many men have internalized this idea, this mythology, this archetype. They feel they must solve their problems alone, avoid emotional disclosure, and present a facade of unshakable strength. But true resilience comes not from isolation, but from relational integrity. And the media keeps rolling this shit out. You know, he's a self-made man. The most destructive bullshit on the planet. There's many more. But right now, for this podcast, that's the one I'm picking on. Men need connection, not superficial bonds based on shared interests or transactional roles. It's nice to have a team that we feel like we belong with, but it needs to be deeper than that. What we need are deep, vulnerable relationships built on trust, built on empathy, and emotional reciprocity. The Making Good Men Great movement and framework encourages men to replace the myth of self-sufficiency with the power of interdependence, not independence, interdependence. We build networks of support, cultivate emotional fluency, and provide spaces where men can be real, raw, and relational. Vulnerability is not a flaw, it's in fact a superpower. One of the aspects of this superpower is empathy. And this is often misunderstood, especially among men who are never taught to value emotional connection. But empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, isn't about weakness or passivity. It's about tuning into our shared humanity. In truth, empathy is a form of strength. It requires presence, patience, and self-awareness. It allows us to bridge difference, respond rather than react, and create safe emotional spaces for ourselves and others. As part of the Making Good Men Great framework, I teach that empathy is central to both personal growth and leadership. It enhances communication, it deepens trust, and it transforms conflict into connection. Empathy is how we become whole and how we help others to do the same. Imagine a world where leaders value understanding over dominance, where fathers teach their sons that compassion is courage, where men support each other through shared emotional language rather than competition. Empathy is not a side note in our evolution, it's the main event. And embracing it is a radical act of defiance against patriarchal ideology and conditioning. So what does that lead us to? Well, it leads us to an inclusive masculinity. To redefine masculinity, we must embrace its diversity. Masculinity is not a singular identity. It is a broad, pluralistic, and evolving spectrum of human experiences. It can be logical and emotional, assertive and nurturing, fierce and gentle. Inclusive masculinity recognizes that there is no right way to be a man. It honors cultural differences, sexual orientations, neurodiversity, and varying emotional temperaments. It invites men to show up fully, not as what society demands, but as who they are authentically. This means dismantling the homophobia, racism, transphobia, and classism that are often used to police masculinity. It also means helping each other step out of the shame, the perfectionism, and performance into genuine presence. In real life terms, inclusive masculinity looks like listening to understand, not just to respond, expressing love and appreciation with intention, creating emotional safety in our relationships, naming and sharing our emotional needs, and actively questioning the narratives that we've inherited. These aren't just new social skills. They're a pathway to healing, to growth, and fundamentally to freedom. It is the pathway politically to democracy, to real democracy. Making Good Men Great invites men to move from fear to integrity, from performative strength to embodied wholeness. This is not easy work, but ultimately it is profoundly rewarding. So here's the call to action on this. The question is, where do we begin? Well, reflect. Start by identifying where rigid models of masculinity show up in your life. What beliefs did you inherit? What parts of yourself have you hidden? Then reconnect. Choose one relationship where you can be more emotionally present just this week. Start a conversation, offer a compliment, ask a deeper question. And then reimagine. Picture your ideal version of masculinity. What qualities would you embody? How would you show up in relationships, at work, and in your community? The Making Good Men Great journey isn't linear. It's cyclical. And it's lifelong. It asks for courage. It asks for reflection and accountability. But it offers something even more powerful in return, and that's liberation. Masculinity at its best is not about control or conquest. It's not about coercion. It's about connection, contribution, and conscious living. So let the Making Good Men Great goals serve as your compass. Cultivate being authentic, not just a performance. Practice empathy and emotional courage. Build respect and build equitable relationships. Support collective healing, not dominance, not revolution, but evolution. And embrace your evolving self with grace and curiosity. The beauty of today is that together we can create a model of masculinity that is worthy of the men we are becoming and of the world that we want to build. So thank you for joining me again today on Inspire Change with Gunter. If this episode spoke to you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with the men in your life. Let's make this conversation ripple into relationships, communities, and systems. If we do not want to live under totalitarianism, this is the way forward. Remember Arendt's words. And also remember, the world doesn't need more dominant men. It requires more connected men, more authentic men, more empathic men. So until next time, join me next week for another deep and meaningful conversation into the world of going from the personal to the political. They're interconnected. We have no other choices in this. Until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.